got one final speaker before we open it up. I'll just remind the speakers that there were a couple of questions really dealing with the same thing, so they could be thinking about that. What are some of the challenges you see to the call to the inter-union unity, and how should class-conscious workers in England overcome them? As I said, we'll come back to that question, but these electronic devices. So the final speaker, Anna, is a member of the Workers' Voice, United States. She's a student at the Smith College in Massachusetts, where she's a member of a student group called United Student Labour Action Coalition, which launches solidarity campaigns with on-campus unions. She's currently campaigning with the Dining and Housekeeping Union to secure them a fair contract. So, Anna, over to you.
Yeah, thank you, Martin. Yeah, I'm a member of this group, USLAC. A little update on that. The union we're working with has reached a tentative agreement with the college. It's not great in terms of wage increases, and there's no language about understaffing or healthcare, but us students are continuing to campaign, and actually yesterday occupied the president of the college's private residence on campus and read a speech in solidarity with the workers. So that's where we're at with that. But yeah, I'm going to talk a bit about what the international working class, especially here in the US, can take away from the lessons of the UK strike wave. I'll start by talking a little bit about the railroad labor crisis going on in the US right now. We were going to have a railroad worker speak on this, but he was unable to join today. But I'll talk about it a little bit. So the major rail unions here in the US are negotiating their 5-year contract with the private rail companies. Some of the big issues on the table are sick pay. Workers are currently working under a system where they're penalized for taking unplanned time off, even in the cases of funerals, doctor's appointments, etc. Under the current agreement, rail workers get 1 paid sick day per year. There's also rampant understaffing, as rail companies have cut 1/3 of their workforce over the past 6 years, which has created hazardous working conditions, forcing rail workers to be on call basically 24/7. We're a pretty long way from the 8-hour workday. As the UK has been learning over the past few decades, this is what happens when railways get privatized. Rail companies in the US, which have always been privatized, are extreme examples of unbridled capitalism. They're regional monopolies. They don't really compete with other rail companies. They've been trying to employ one-man crews on these trains, which these like 3-mile long freight trains would only have 1 operator aboard, which is objectively hazardous. And if they had their way, that would have already happened. These companies follow the basic rules of capitalism. They try to spend less in order to make more, meeting little opposition from government regulation. In the past few decades, rail companies have significantly downsized their workforce and made massive cuts to operating costs, resulting in record profits for them, record exploitation for the workers, and not to mention constant inefficiency and railway delays for the rest of us. They have no incentive to pay workers more, nor any incentive to make their industry more efficient or climate friendly, and they actually benefit from government intervention in their favor. This is really interesting because here in the US, this whole negotiations process is complicated by the fact that railway negotiations are not under the same laws that cover other private sector bargaining. They are under a special set of railway labor laws from the 1920s. These came after a 50-year period starting in the 1870s, where American railway workers enacted several monumental wildcat strikes with hundreds of thousands of workers walking off the job for months on end, paralyzing the industry and the country, sending cities into riots, usually ending with the National Guard or the Army coming in to shoot down the strikers. So these laws came after that. The government recognizes the paralyzing power of the railroad industry and introduced this legal framework to make it really, really hard for railroads to legally strike. Now they have to go through a very lengthy mediation process with the federal government before they're legally allowed to strike. And they have been going through this process for a while in this current negotiation process. This is about a contract that actually dates back to 2019. US rail workers have not gone on a strike in 30 years, but this is pretty much the closest they've come since after these 3 years of negotiations. Biden's emergency team brokered a agreement with the railway companies, but when it was sent to the rail unions for ratification, the third biggest rail union rejected it, meaning that they have to go back to negotiations. So a strike is still on the table. This is something really important we're seeing here that's sort of mirroring what's happening in the UK, which is that the class collaborationist wings of the labor movement want to find an end to this. And like other parties are outright hostile. Like somebody mentioned, the bill to like keep Britain moving, increasing the number of votes needed for a legal strike, which neuters a lot of the strike momentum because they want to keep workers down. But we're seeing that the rank and file union members don't want to settle for less than what they're owed. Workers across all industries are recognizing this right now as a really, really important pivotal moment where they're more likely than ever to actually change things with their strike actions. Another important thing we're learning from that is the prevalence of unsanctioned illegal strike actions in the UK, particularly at power stations and at Amazon, which is really something. Workers in the UK have succeeded in growing this strike beyond the traditional boundaries of industrial action, which is really inspiring. We also look to the example of the UK strike wave to see in action the paralyzing power of strike actions. The UK working class has power, and we know this because the government keeps trying to legislate it away through these legal limitations on strikes. We know that in the US, a rail strike here would cost the industry $2 billion a day. It would paralyze the entire country. Yeah. The timing of the railroad crisis in the US and the strike wave in the UK is no coincidence. This moment right now is the latest in a series of economic crises, which always hit workers the hardest. Labor activity always surges in these moments. This activity is defensive, though. It comes as a response. It does not preempt these crises. As long as capital controls what's being produced, these crises are only going to keep coming, and they will get worse every time. The only way to change this is to change what controls production, not profit, not markets, but the working people themselves who can open a new vision for humanity. What's missing, though, is a political vehicle for labor. Like I said previously, none of the bourgeois parties are capable of improving workers' lives. They're bourgeois parties. They try to keep the peace between the contradictory interests of the working class and big business. As Glenroy talked about earlier, the Labor Party appears more and more separate from the ranks of the workers' movement. They absorb and redirect the movement away from meaningful long-term change in favor of short-term conciliation. Any attempt at party reform is a waste of time, for these parties will never diverge from that ultimate goal. We need to recognize that and move away from them. We must organize for independent working class political action in order to build the revolutionary party, one that fights on the ground for the labor movement. A party that's organized around the interests of the working class as a whole and organizes around their immediate needs using the methods of class struggle, street demonstrations, strikes, and mass mobilizations. One that over and over again addresses the current crises of capitalism, inflation, imperialism, climate change, etc., by working to create a society where they could not happen, a society not organized around markets and profits, but around the needs of humanity. A party that is by necessity international, that allies itself with independent working class organizations around the world so that we can learn from the wins and losses of you guys. So how do we do that? We build independent working class organizations like unions, and we work within them to demand the things the ruling class are not capable of giving us without upending the order of capitalist society. We intervene in the class struggle wherever possible to put power in the hands of the working class in a fundamental way. We do this in our workplaces, and in my case, my university. I'm a student at Smith College, like Martin mentioned, where we've been working alongside this dining and housekeeping union. My organization, our mission is to build worker power on campus and beyond. So we do this by holding solidarity actions. We've had rallies, email campaigns, we've contacted press, and like I mentioned yesterday, we actually occupied the residence of the president of the college. We demanded that the college add more positions to fix understaffing and implement an affordable healthcare plan, because right now some workers are paying 30 to 40% of their monthly wages on their healthcare. You guys in the UK might be shocked at that, but this is the US we're talking about. But here on campus, I see my role as orienting the boundless and generally aimless energy of student activism into an actual student movement, like France in 1968, for example, one that works alongside the working class to build worker power for a better future for all of us. Neither the US nor the UK have even half the population unionized, which is why support and acceptance from non-union sectors like students is so important. And that support is there from the students. When the university and college union in the UK went on strike last year, surveys showed that 73% of students supported the strike and its goals. So many workers in the union at my school have told me that loud public support from the student body has drastically upped their morale and given them motivation to refuse to give in on their fight. So this is what happens when you build that solidarity across sectors. Around the world, people are looking to the lessons from the UK strike wave. We call for solidarity movements with workers around the world to clarify the connections between your struggle and ours, since it all falls under the umbrella of the rampant crises of capitalism. All that is to say, we in the US support the striking workers in the UK, and we stand behind the rank and file leaders leading the surge of action. We condemn the greed of the bosses and the system that lets them throw workers into poverty while they get richer. We call for the nationalization of industry. Every worker in the world should be carefully studying the lessons and examples of UK strikers and should organize solidarity campaigns around your struggle, because it is our struggle too. So thank you for having me on this panel.